Him. Hey, folks, you're listening to Terms of Engagement. I'm Archon Fung, professor at the Harvard Kennedy School and director of the Ash Center for Democratic Governance and Innovation here.
And I'm Stephen Richer. I'm the former elected Maricopa County recorder, and I am now a senior practice fellow at the Ash Center at Harvard Kennedy School. And today I'm coming to this program from Washington, D.C., and I'm nursing a bit of a hoarse throat, so apologies for that.
And what are you doing in Washington, D.C., Stephen?
Talking about elections, talking about democracy, and so lots to be talking about. And certainly Washington, D.C. is a very interesting place these days, but I guess a lot of people aren't working because, of course, we're now in, day 4 or something of the government shutdown,
Yeah.
and doesn't look like there's an end that is imminent, and so that will continue. But today we're going to be talking about something that is, of course, very salient to the academic community, salient to Harvard University, though, of course, as always, Archon and I and our guests are always speaking just in our independent capacities. But this pertains to a proposal that the Trump administration last week sent to 10 universities, and I'm going to get the title here, that's called the Compact for Academic Excellence in Higher Education. And so it's a 10-point plan that seeks to create a new relationship with specific universities that, if they sign on, will provide, quote, multiple positive benefits, end quote, and, quote, substantial and meaningful federal grants, end quote. And it was sent to University of Arizona, Brown, Dartmouth, MIT, Penn, USC, Texas, Vanderbilt, and Virginia. And of course, Archon and I have talked about Harvard's relationship vis-a-vis the administration and some of the negotiations and lawsuits that have gone on there. But we now have a new frontier in the conversation between academia and the administration.
Great. And as always, we try to bring current events into a conversation about how they're affecting American democracy. And so I think part of what's on the table here, what the stakes are, is this compact good or bad for American democracy? And you could think, well, it's bad for American democracy because universities need to be independent and far from the government to make their contribution to our democracy. But you could think the compact would be very good for democracy if you think that universities have drifted far from the American mission of serving America, of serving science, and including many diverse viewpoints. And maybe I'm sure fans of the compact thinks that this is creating a little bit of a correction there. To help us understand the news, we have a great guest today, Joey Fishkin. Joey is a professor of law at UCLA, where he teaches and writes about employment discrimination, election law, constitutional law, education law, among other topics. Before joining UCLA, he taught for a decade at the University of Texas School of Law, where he was the Mars McClellan professor. Joey received his BA in ethics, politics, and economics, summa at Yale, and his JD at Yale as well, and a DPhil from Oxford University. And then he clerked for Chief Justice Margaret Marshall of the Supreme Judicial Court of Massachusetts. Welcome, Joey.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Great.
Quite the resume. Few degrees there.
Yeah, maybe definitely a few great degrees from great schools.
A lot of time in higher ed world.
Yeah. And so far outside of Texas, schools that have managed to avoid the sights of the Trump administration. So why don't we get started? You wrote a great blog post on balkanization. For those of you who don't know, it's a big website that a lot of legal academics write for, maintained by Jack Balkan, or used to. He probably has a whole staff maintaining it now. But in that blog post, part of what you're aiming to do is set the record straight on what the compact actually is and what it does. And so I'm going to quote from the blog post, and then you can elaborate. And so here you write, first, for the benefit of any journalists who read this, both the blog post and the compact, I, Joey, think it's important to lay out a few simple bullet points on what the compact does and why the spin adopted by so many mainstream reporters is incorrect. In reality, the compact is a maximalist document demanding a near complete surrender of core academic freedoms of the university. It purports to give a vast new leverage to the DOJ if the DOJ sours on the university for almost any reason, to take away federal benefits to which the university and its faculty and students are entitled under federal law. So here, you're not even so much getting into the substance of the compact, but rather kind of the legal form and process of the compact, which is great to have a legal analyst. So maybe open, like, why do you think that it's particularly problematic? A lot of people would think it's better because it's carrots, not sticks. With Harvard and Columbia, it was sticks. We're going to take away all of your research grants. Here, we're offering some benefits if you sign on. Why isn't that better?
Yeah, so there was a cover letter that refers to benefits, that refers to there'll be meaningful grants, you'll be first in line. That all sounds like carrots. But when you look at the actual compact, especially if you're, a lawyer, you read, all you need is like the first and the last paragraph, really, which says, here are some benefits that universities get from cooperation with the federal government. And it lists some really major ones, not just grants, but students can get student loans. Foreign students can get visas. You get favorable tax status. That's your 501c3 status, and others. And they sort of list off these benefits. And they say, universities are free to pursue other models that aren't what we're laying out in this compact if they will forego these federal benefits. And then the last paragraph, the most important paragraph of the compact, says, the Department of Justice will review whether you're complying with this compact. And any finding, and what a finding means is not a court, but the Department of Justice finding that you're out of line with some piece of the compact, and we can talk about the moving parts inside. But if the Justice Department finds that a school is out of line, then a school that has signed this thing agrees in writing that they will forfeit all the benefits of this compact for 1 year or 2 years, that they'll return all the federal money, all the research grants, which, by then had probably been spent in labs and in research. The university somehow would have to return all that money and lose potentially its 501c3 status and all the other listed benefits for a year or more, which is a really, in the blog post, I describe it as like a sword of Damocles over university. Yeah. Because what it is, it's like, the Department of Justice wants more leverage over universities than it has now. And if a university signs this compact, they will be saying, whether it'll hold up in court, I don't know, but they will be saying, we're giving you all this more leverage than how the law looks now.
So, Joey, you put quotation marks around benefits, and I want to ask on that, but I also want to remind people that if you put questions into the comment box, I'll take a look at them, see if we can work them into the conversation. But you put quotations around benefits, and so this reminds me a little bit of when my mom, growing up, she would say, you can play on the computer if you do your chores, and it was like, wait, I thought I could already play on the computer. It seems like you're, taking away a benefit just to give it to me again, or making it contingent upon something. Like, are these new benefits, or is this simply allowing you to play by the status quo if you sign this new compact?
Right. The cover letter refers to sort of meaningful new grants or something, but the actual compact, everything in there is an existing benefit, like you were talking about with, you thought you already could play on the computer. And not only that, but it's an existing benefit that federal law already says universities are entitled to, and that it's not easy for the government to take away.
So I guess if it's an existing benefit, why would any of these 10 universities sign this if it's just subjecting you to new qualifications for the same existing possible benefits?
You're right. I think the reason to look, I actually don't think any university is going to sign this thing in this form. I think they will try to get it changed and maybe try to negotiate it. That's my prediction. But I think the reason that they might feel inclined to sign, as I know some of the regions of Texas were initially inclined or supportive, the reason is because you want to be on the good side of this administration rather than on the bad side. Precisely because, as we know from watching what's going on at Harvard, even if you don't sign one of these compacts, the university is vulnerable to various kinds of federal attack that are, the weaponization of existing federal programs that the government could try to take away. And so I think, the reason that you're seeing a lot of silence out of these 9 schools is that, their lawyers are probably looking at the fine print and seeing that this is a little bit dangerous to sign on to. And also they don't want to say no because that could put them in the crosshairs as well. So you're getting a lot of quiet.
Interesting. I was trying to think about analogies that I could understand more easily. I'm not in a position to sign a compact for a university, thank goodness. But I guess I was thinking about it maybe like an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, right? The First Amendment ordinarily, kind of gives me the right to say whatever I want. The point of an NDA is I'm not going to talk about what I learn in, some company meeting. So I no longer have that right, and I sign it away, even though the Constitution is still there, and there's the First Amendment is still there. I voluntarily give away this, cede this right that I have. Is that the right way to think about the compact? Is you ordinarily have, rights to some kind of process under the Administrative Procedures Act or Title VI or Title IX or whatever it is, or federal, grant provisions, and then by signing the compact, you're putting yourself in another kind of, another kind of deal where those procedures don't exist anymore. But like you said, it's like some to be determined DOJ set of procedures about whether or not universities have violated.
Right. I mean, I think that's what it looks like. And, I'm not saying a university couldn't argue to some court in the future, oh yeah, even though we signed, you still need more process than this to enforce it against it. I don't know. But the document itself doesn't give any process. And it certainly does not say that schools will be entitled to all the process that they're entitled to now. And I think also this agreement contrasts a little bit with, the first settlement that the government reached, the one with Columbia, includes an independent monitor and provisions for arbitration. If the government thinks Columbia is not holding up its end of what the government was asking of Columbia, it's an independent arbitrator who's going to sort of figure out and fight that out. If this compact went into effect just how it reads on paper, there's no independent arbitrator. It would just be the Justice Department unilaterally deciding.
Joey, one of our listeners said, please explain how this is different from extortion. And I think having read your piece, you would say, this isn't, and this is extortion. Can you help us understand what someone maybe more supportive of the compact might say in its defense, or how this isn't extortionary?
Sure.
Or do you think that there's no colorable argument?
I think it's easy for someone to defend the compact because there's plenty of stuff in there. They carefully have jammed together a bunch, and I hope we'll talk about the substance of what they're asking universities to do, because much of the substance is also pretty wild and invasions of academic freedom. But there's also stuff in the compact that's perfectly reasonable and that actually many schools already do. For example, I noticed, publish the grade distributions. I mean, we do that over here at UCLA in my law school. I'm not sure how effective it is at tamping down grade inflation, but that's the goal. Reasonable thing to do. I don't think the federal government needs to tell universities to do it, but I think everybody who I hear defend this compact looks to the substantive provisions and says, hey, some of these substantive provisions seem pretty good. Like maybe a tuition freeze for 5 years seems good. Affordability is a big problem. I think that's a totally reasonable policy for a university to undertake. I don't think it's great for the federal government to say, freeze tuition, and by the way, we're also cutting Pell Grants and loans. That's a separate problem. But I think, like this compact actually would not make college more affordable because of those other actions. But anyway, I think a defender of the compact would point to the reasonable sounding stuff in it. and would not focus on the enforcement side. And maybe would say, well, the federal government's going to exercise good faith and not enforce it in a bad faith way, which I think your mileage may vary as to how plausible that sounds.
Yeah. So Sean in the chat writes about the importance of stopping anti-Semitism, which was certainly the announced goal for the administration interactions with Columbia and Harvard University. In my read of the compact, there's not so much about anti-Semitism. So could you talk about both that particular kind of problem, anti-Semitism, and then what are the other goals on your read of the compact? Like, what is the administration trying to get out of this? What's it trying to do?
Yeah. So obviously there's a lot of debate about exactly how to think about what is anti-Semitism. I certainly think anti-Semitism is a problem. I'm Jewish. There's a lot of people on campus who would say anti-Semitism is bad anywhere. I certainly agree. But there's a lot of pro-Palestine speech that controversially some people view as anti-Semitic. That's the hotly debated part. And I do think there are some things in this compact. You're right that this compact goes way beyond the topic of anti-Semitism and doesn't really mention it. But I do think there are some things in this document that aim to make it easier for the federal government to force universities to punish students who speak about Palestine in particular. And a couple of provisions like that are, there's one that says that that the university needs to punish any support for organizations that the U.S. government designates a terrorist organization, which actually seems totally reasonable that we shouldn't have people supporting terrorist organizations. But as a judge, a federal district judge recently held in a case about student visas, this government has a real pattern of labeling any pro-Palestine speech as, quote, support for Hamas. And if you do that, then it's all support for an organization that's a terrorist organization and therefore punishable. And you don't have to prove anymore that it's anti-Semitic. And I think that's the piece that's the most relevant to this sort of longer arc of trying to get universities to crack down more on pro-Palestinian speech.
But we have gone pretty far afield from what was our original departing point of involvement in American universities, which was alleged rampant anti-Semitism, hostility towards Jewish students, occupation of buildings. And I will say I'm a little less I guess maybe cheerful about the sentiments of some of those protesters. I tend to think that a lot of it is rooted in anti-Semitism, and but setting that aside, this compact's talking about requiring the SAT and the ACT, and the nexus to anti-Semitism.
We're going very far. I agree. We're going very far. So I'll just say on the anti-Semitism point, part of what's going on here, I think, is that some of the initial schools like Columbia, that the administration targeted, had a lot of unusual demonstrations on the campus that there was this debate about whether to class them as anti-Semitic. Even though a lot of Jews participated in them, there was a sense, that you could argue those were anti-Semitic. The federal government has big aims for higher ed that are not limited to the schools that had a lot of those incidents. And so they're not going to be able to use Title VI and this anti-Semitism argument against all the universities in the United States, because most of them didn't have big incidents like the ones at Columbia. And so what you're seeing is a set of other goals. I think a big one is to defund universities, to make universities just lose their budgetary foundations, and also particularly to make them skew more toward the hard sciences, as the compact puts it. The compact demands that the richest schools give free tuition to students in the hard sciences, which you can imagine would definitely be a strong incentive, getting people out of the humanities and social sciences and into the quote unquote hard sciences, a category that itself is a problem. But anyway, that's part of what the compact aims to do. The biggest thing the compact aims to do, I think, is to force universities to engage in an enormous program of affirmative action for conservatives and to suppress political speech that the administration doesn't like. So the affirmative action program for conservatives is laid out in the part of the compact where it talks about a diversity of viewpoints in every department and school and subfield.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I think that a diversity of viewpoints is good. Actually, universities have freer expression and more diverse viewpoints than any other American institution. Now, we have a humongous amount of disagreement on every faculty I've ever been part of and every part of the university I've ever seen. But it's true that a lot of departments, skew more to the liberal side than the conservative side of the political spectrum overall. And that's what this is demanding, that in every field from, art to, African American studies, we find conservatives to hire in those departments. And I guess I will say, as someone who's been around a few hiring committees at universities, this kind of affirmative action is something universities already do a lot. We already do a lot of affirmative action for conservatives, but this compact would demand a lot more.
Good. On that viewpoint diversity phrase, one part of the debate around the compact has been this particular phrase in it is that it demands that universities transform or abolish institutional units that purposely punish, belittle, or even spark violence against conservative ideas, right? And so I think a lot of people in the commentary have said, well, I don't like that clause because it violates free expression in the First Amendment. People should be able to have a robust debate, and some of that might involve belittling. My problem with it is more hypocrisy, because I see a lot of things coming out of the administration's social media feeds that definitely belittle and punish and maybe even spark violence against other people's ideas. So if you think that unitary executive is a broad concept and it's really speaking with one voice, then shouldn't it establish a more broad standard of no punishing, belittling, or even sparking violence against ideas that you disagree with? And I don't know, maybe the politicians could set a good example before demanding that we do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, it was a little surprising to me actually to read that clause and because it would have been so easy for them to write it with the fig leaf of protecting all sides' ideas, but they instead went for let's just really say what we mean on that one. We only care about belittling conservative ideas. And that is something that not only do you have to punish it, you have to abolish or reform entire departments of your school that are, quote, belittling conservative ideas. I mean, I don't know, the economics department should definitely be looking over its shoulder, because if a conservative idea, no one really knows what that means, but if that means like the Trump administration's ideas, you're not going to find a lot of defenders of tariffs in most economics departments. They're pretty neoliberal. Are they belittling what this government is doing? And I just on down through every part of, all the people in psychology who actually study the roots of liberal and conservative. Oh gosh, you can imagine how that's going to go.
But regardless of the causal factor and of the facts on the ground, which we might dispute a little bit, I might be a little more pessimistic about sort of the state of intellectual diversity at various universities. I do think on the whole, it's getting better over the last few years. There's undoubtedly a level of distrust with higher education among the American public right now that is at levels we haven't previously seen. There's undoubtedly a lot of hostility towards higher education right now. And Archon's colleague, professor at the Ash Center at Harvard Kennedy School, Daniel Allen, writes, we need to be having this conversation. We need to be restarting this conversation. And this compact, while I might not sign it, at least restarts the social contract with the American public. Do you think that there is any merit on those grounds to this document?
I would say I have a lot of respect for Professor Allen. I think there's negative amounts of merit to this document in terms of the really necessary work that you're referring to of rebuilding and understanding between universities and most of the United States about exactly what we do, why we do what we do, why what universities do is valuable, and all of that stuff. I could imagine a world in which this compact, which has it's full of right-wing craziness, has the effect of starting an honest conversation about, well, how should we change how we run universities and so on. But I feel like the incredible amounts of bad faith that the administration brings to any such negotiation or discussion that's been amply demonstrated in their attacks on other schools already, including yours,
Yep.
it indicates that it's going to be a heavy lift. Like, I would be much more interested in, a conversation with sort of any other administration about these terms and how we think about federal money and all of that. This is the worst time to have that conversation.
So I think Archon and I might try to pull Professor Allen in for a future conversation, and we'll be curious to have that, and we'll circle back with you. But Archon, what happens to this school, to our school, Harvard University, and other schools, if 7 or more of these schools sign this compact? How does it shift the landscape? How does it shift the position of holdout schools, do you think?
I think it would make the position of holdout schools weaker, because the collective action problem of sticking together for independent institutions begins to unravel. On that topic, one change in tactic, and you write about this a little bit, Joey, is that here the compact is posed to 8 to 10 schools, whereas the prior efforts have been of the administration have been addressing universities one at a time. Yep. And so why do you think that there's a group address, and does it make it easier or more difficult for those schools to act in unison? And then Gene Corbin in the chat raises Danielle's idea that maybe this could be the beginning. These 8 to 10 schools could be the beginning of a more collective effort among many more colleges and universities to think about, well, what should our industrial policy in education be on this set of questions?
Yeah, look, I think these schools were chosen in part because the administration thought some of them might be softer targets, because in several cases, the relatively strong presidents that some of these schools had have been forced out by conservative activism, like at UVA and Penn. I think the danger is that maybe the administration has chosen right and they've found soft targets. But I do think that the switch from the kind of carefully negotiated bespoke agreements with individual schools to trying to roll up more of the whole sector in one chunk, it does create the possibility for more collective action. And I think a collective response of no from these schools, or most of them, would be quite a powerful starting point for telling the administration, an independent higher ed sector actually matters, and you don't get to just have the government telling all of us what to do. And as a former, Texas law professor and really a Texan, I would hope that some of these schools can channel a little bit of the American broad, resistance to national federal control of education. That's where we need to go.
So, Joey, I used to play a parlor game during Passover where we would take a look at the 10 plagues and we would say, like, which one do we think was the worst plague, whether it was locusts or whether it was bloods. So if you had to say sort of like which one of these is most problematic for universities from this 10-point compact, what do you think would be the hardest for universities to swallow?
Oh, there's no question. It's number 10 by a mile. Stick it at the end. It's the part where the Justice Department gets to unilaterally enforce the terms. A lot of the terms are vague, and that gives huge discretion to the government to decide whether you are in trouble. And I think that's the core problem here. And many of the other things like viewpoint diversity and whatever, I mean, the university won't implement it necessarily how the Trump administration wants, but all universities strive for viewpoint diversity all the time. And the dynamics of that, as you were saying, change over time. There's been a lot of hiring of conservatives lately at some schools. And I think there's a lot of stuff in the middle that, is salvageable, but the core problem is, when you are thinking about an agreement like this, like the most important question is who decides and what are the consequences? And if you keep your eye on that, I think you'll see why I am pretty confident that no university of these 9 is going to sign this exact document in this form.
So putting the Justice Department in the role of judge, jury, and fact finder, judge, jury, executioner, and everything, right? And removing it from the court system almost. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So that's why it's great to have a legal scholar on board, is to really highlight the importance of the kind of rule of law and due process kind of features of this compact, and the idea that if you give up on that much due process, it's really, really not a good thing. As promised, we never talk for more than 30 minutes, so we're about at time. As a reminder, if you have suggestions or feedback on this episode or future episodes, please send to info@ash.harvard.edu.
And we put Professor Fishkin's article that we were talking about in the chat. And thanks very much, as always, to Sarah, Evelyn, Colette, and Courtney for making this show possible. And of course, special thanks to Professor Joey Fishkin for joining us here today, and look forward to seeing you all next week.
Thanks so much, Joey.
Great.